Hello everyone, this is Michelle again, another video coming to you, and as I've said in my first ever video that I made about my channel, I'm going to be doing a regular movie review today, and it's going to just be movie review Thursdays. So I just got done watching a movie called American Gangster that was made in 2007, a little bit a while back. It's not really considered anything way too high of what Hollywood considers to be, I guess, a memorable films, but I think it is an interesting film for what it is, and it's actually based on a true story about an actual person who sort of lived this life that I'm going to be discussing in this review, and it tries to show the audience sort of that time period of when everything in this movie was occurring. And I think overall it was a decent film. It was directed by Ridley Scott, and I really like Ridley Scott. Some of his films I think are really good. And this one I think was really well done. I think the performances were really nice. And it received a fairly decent critical perception from critics and moviegoers alike. So it's not necessarily maybe really well known, but it's something that people may enjoy or find familiar with, or maybe come back to and look at. So I'm going to just start this review by discussing the plot, and basically the plot in a nutshell is about this guy who actually lived, or I'm not sure if he is living now, it probably is, I'm not sure, but his name is Frank Lucas, and this guy was basically a drug dealing gangster slash mobster, and basically his entire life revolved around this sort of activity. He was sort of a businessman, you could say, of the drug industry, the illegal drug industry, especially in Harlem. And he gets a little bit, it doesn't really show it a lot in the movie, but in the beginning it kind of shows how there's this one person that Frank was associating with, and how that person's death ends up sort of marking his idea to take off from where this former gangster left off. And you kind of get a sense that he feels like it's his sort of calling, I guess, to do this kind of risky business, and to come up with something maybe new that nobody has really done before. And basically what he does is he ends up kind of controlling this whole area, and particularly Harlem. And what he does is he uses his power and influence to buy certain companies and things like that. He was actually really rich, and made a lot of his money by selling drugs. Now, the reason why he in particular was different than a lot of like drug dealers of that era is that he actually used his kind of business skills overseas. He went to Asia, in Bangkok, Thailand, and that's where they actually do make strong drugs, and one of those drugs happens to be heroin. And he decides that he's going to work with them and then take those drugs that are from Thailand and ship them over to the US. And the way that they do that is that since the story and this time period reflects onto the Vietnam War, the Vietnam War is still going on, and these people in the army actually get on board with Frank, and basically they create this underground sort of chain where the drugs end up getting shipped through army transport, and people in the army end up working with Frank. So he kind of has just this whole underground system that nobody is really aware of. People, even in the movie, it mentions the fact that people don't really know who Frank Lucas is, and he tries to cover that up a lot. He tries to maintain this mentality that he's just a businessman. He doesn't really dress like a lot of the other gangsters do. He's very classy and sophisticated. He tries to keep himself out of the spotlight or attention. And I think that's probably what made him so successful compared to all of the other competition that was surrounded by during the time when it comes to dealing with these kinds of illegal substances. And Frank Lucas is played by Denzel Washington. I think Denzel Washington did a decent job of showing this kind of character. Because Frank is, they don't really go into his character so much, but they show that he does all of these considerably negative things, like dealing drugs and using violence as a ways of making sure things are kept in line. But he also cares a lot about his family, and he could have just used all of the money for himself, but he gives back to his family and feels like his family is really important to him, at least. And you kind of see how that later ends up sort of backfiring on him, and how once things start going sour for Frank, his family becomes way more removed from him. And a lot of his relatives were involved in the business as well, and kind of just went along with it, and even partaked into distributing the drugs. And the ways that they would distribute the drugs, which is actually really interesting, I thought, was that they would set up these shops. One person would have an auto shop where you can get your car repaired, and basically they would use that as sort of a station where you could buy drugs from them. And the reason why Frank's drugs in particular, his drugs basically heroin, the one he was selling, the reason why they were unique, according to the film, was the fact that it's of better quality than the competitors were selling. So, and they end up calling it blue magic, because when the people who were trying to experiment to see how the quality of the drug is, it becomes a blue, and when they put some chemical on it and then it turns blue, I guess that shows that it's of a better quality. So I thought that was rather interesting, and that's why Frank was able to do that, and he was able to sell it for a lot larger or a lot lower amount of money, because he just basically cut out the middleman, and he was able to distribute it for a lower amount of money. And so he made a lot of money. At the end of the film, it says that he had offshore bank accounts. He was pretty rich, and he got away with a lot of stuff. So even if you probably disagree with his sense of morality, you have to admit, for who he is, that's really surprising that he was able to just go on for it for so long and not get caught or not get noticed. Because when you're rich, you think that you'd be able to somehow get noticed by people. But Frank kept himself sort of in the shadows. And you have to kind of understand that that's how the atmosphere of this movie is. a lot of the time, Frank is sort of, and the whole surroundings that he's in, they're not really colorful. A lot of the atmosphere in this movie is really dark, almost back alley, dark, grim, not really all that colorful, just very obscure at times, and very hard for people to see who is who's at some points. It's not that it's a criticism, but it's just sort of how this movie is trying to show sort of this dark atmosphere, that you're entering into kind of a different world, sort of. So I think that was a good direction choice on Ridley Scott's part. And so I think that's really the plot, and how the plot basically just revolves around Frank, and the whole idea that Frank is sort of this means to an end, and how he sort of drives the whole plot throughout this entire movie. And then there's also the other side of this story, where it shows Russell Crowe's character, whose name is Richie Roberts, and basically he's a detective who's trying to stop Frank Lucas. And he initially, at first, doesn't know who Frank Lucas is. He's just trying to find mob dealers and people who are breaking the law, and he's dealing with a lot of, people of that sort. So he doesn't initially know who Frank is, but then once he finds out who Frank is, he makes sort of his mission to find Frank. And what also is interesting too is that some of the cops are actually taking bribes from Frank, so that kind of comes in as well. And there's another character played by Josh Brolin, and I don't remember his name, but basically Josh Brolin's character kind of gets involved with that, and it shows a little bit of how that ends up affecting sort of the plot. And Russell Crowe's character in particular is kind of he has sort of this side thing going on, even though they don't really go into it as much. It's just sort of, he's divorced, and he eventually decides that, my wife should, or my ex-wife should take the kid, because they have a kid, to another location because it's not safe because of the work that I'm doing, because he is getting involved in a lot of undercover work. So he comes to realization, I don't really need that. And I thought those parts were kind of, I don't know. I don't know if they were meant to kind of maybe establish Russell Crowe as kind of a character or not. And I thought it was funny because it kind of seems like him and Frank, because most of the movie is focused on either these two characters. Either it's going to Russell Crowe or it's going to Frank. And you kind of see how they are different in ways. And I thought it was interesting how Russell Crowe is fighting for the law, but then he has like this personal side problem with his family. And then Frank doesn't really seem to have so many family issues, not until the end, but he sort of maintains this kind of different mentality than a lot of the people that he's surrounded by. He sort of maintains this persona like he's, a gentleman. At one point he's talking to his would-be wife in the movie, and he says like, I'm a gentleman. I've been taught to be that way. And you kind of see that behind that gentleman persona, there's a lot of internal things that are just sort of hidden. And so his gentlemanness is kind of a facade. And with Russell Crowe's character, though, you kind of see who exactly he is. And he's not really sugar-coated, whereas Frank Lucas is a kind of sugar-coated character because he's trying to maintain this whole gentleman-like persona, but deep down he's just a criminal. So that's basically how the plot works in a nutshell, and how these characters, I think the plot just kind of goes with the characters together, and how, the plot ends up affecting Frank, and how that shows his character, and then how Russell Crowe's side of the tale ends up affecting his character as well. So the characters and the plot pretty much go hand in hand. It's not really a character study, it's more of a plot-driven movie. And you have to pay attention in this movie. If you want to understand it, you have to pay attention. And that's the important thing to get down is, pay attention. You have to be in a pay attention mood to watch this movie. When I was sitting down watching it, I was kind of in that mood to go, okay, I'm going to pay attention. You can't zone out, because if you miss something, then it's going to be hard for you to catch up. And I think that's what a lot of these detective movies are like. You can't just zone out at one point. It's not like kind of like Forrest Gump where you can get the plot. It's pretty spelled out. It doesn't really need to. It's not really complicated. There's not like a lot of details and things like that. This is a movie where it thrives on details. So really pay attention, because you may miss something, and it's important to pay attention because it's a plot-driven movie. It's not really a character-driven movie. It's trying to show you how the plot ends up affecting the characters, but for the most part, this is plot-driven, and it gets somewhat intense at times. For the most part, I thought that it seemed to flow all right for what it was. And I guess what I can say of my final thoughts on this movie is I definitely would recommend that you watch it if you are interested in this kind of movie. And I thought that it was really interesting that it was based on an actual true story. And there's just a lot of details involved in this movie. So if you give it the time and the patience, then I think you can enjoy it. For the most part, it's gotten like in the 70s range with people. So it's, for what it is, it's a fairly decently executed movie for what it is. And I think Denzel Washington is one of the actors that kind of stands out probably in the movie, and Russell Crowe does too. But they're really the main characters, and the ones that really are given any kind of sort of development. All the other characters are kind of just side characters and don't really have a say of screen time or really personality, but their whole purpose is to sort of just drive the two main characters, Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington, to whatever ends it's going to happen by what the plot goes through. So overall, I thought the film was well done. I don't really want to give any more away because I encourage people to watch it and see for themselves. But that's really all I can give away from the plot and how everything goes. I mean, I don't want to really give away the ending or what happens. So I think that's really all I can say about this movie. So if you find whatever I said to be appealing or interesting, I encourage you to check it out if you haven't heard of it. And I will talk to you all later.